Good afternoon. It's 5:20. It's Talk TV live from the Talk Radio studios. Now, it's been reported that nearly half of adults surveyed by the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, have said that they bought less food in the past fortnight due to high prices. And just if you're listening to this and you think this is some office of quackery, this is the ONS, which is pretty much the organisation that the government uses in order to come up with its own kind of macroeconomic forecast, right? So they really matter. And it's yet another stark reminder that the cost of living crisis continues to spiral out of control. What should be done, what can be done with this rising inflation, and what more will it take for the government to act? And really also, what can they do? Let's unpick all of those points with Dr. Roger Gewolb, CEO of Fair Money. Dr. Roger, I have to say, looking at your title, CEO of Fair Money, personal finance expert. Now, what that means is, presumably, that your job is to help people better cope and manage their money. Now, that's not taught in schools. It's one of the things you pick up in the big, wide world. But there are certain things that you can predict. Now, for a generation, people haven't had to deal, frankly, with inflation as it is now. For a generation, as long as people can politically remember, over 20 years, the issue of heating a house or eating wasn't as pervasive a horror problem as it is for millions of people in our country. So what can and what should people be doing? Bearing in mind, you heard how I opened this to say that the ONS say that half of the country have bought less food last week because of higher prices.
Well, I think that it isn't so much what people should be doing. It's what the government should be doing, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Your last guest gave a very erudite, sophisticated political analysis of things, but I think the point you just made about people buying less food and people going without meals, it's rather gone beyond that point. And there are just certain things that the government should be doing that are so obvious, which I've discussed at length on various programs on this station. And I suppose I would start with the interest rate rise the other day by the Bank of England. Now, there are two types of inflation. There is demand pull inflation, when everybody is out spending a great deal of money. Right. Restaurants, hospitality have to have a second Prada handbag, blah, 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 holidays. And you've got to put the brakes on that, raise interest rates, make money more expensive. But we're in a different sort of inflation, and economists will tell you that cost push inflation, as it's called, where the price rises are coming from the cost of materials, from shortages of wheat, from Ukraine, from the war. From
just to stop you, because I mean, you're explaining this, I have to say, beautifully. And, I'm going to say this, Dr. Roger, so many people, especially economists, are guilty of deliberately using jargon. Listen to Janet Yellen the other day, chairman of the Fed. And it's almost as if they use the jargon, people, it's like a form of deception. People won't listen or understand or switch off from what people are saying. So I have to say, I really appreciate the way you're explaining this. We're in a situation of inflationary rise, you're saying, in significant part because of global factors which have made, for example, supply chains more challenging, right?
Yeah. Well, I would question the word you just used. It's almost like when people like Janet Yellen speak. It is like.
Right.
We are being treated sort of like not the most intelligent people in the world. And I think what's really going on here is it's getting to a stage where all the political considerations, pardon me, that your last guest made are very valid. People have had enough. It's not going to happen. I mean, giving us a measly 5p on petrol, which, by the way, a survey I ran said that 80% of forecourts didn't pass it on. Giving people on benefits the right to buy their homes when they obviously can't afford the upkeep and they're not going to buy. These are cosmetic sops. Especially after yesterday's by-elections, this government has got to get serious. No contender has stepped up. This is Britain. That would be seen as opportunistic. In the United States, France, Brazil, Italy, Spain, there'd be a feeding frenzy already weeks ago. And people would be saying, you must do this, you must do that. But this is Britain, and we don't behave that way, and it's probably a good thing. But there are things that need to be done.
Well, just to stop you again, you know, you say that as Britain we don't do things that way. In other words, there's been a kind of post-Thatcher consensus that any government intervention in the economy is by its very nature a bad thing and takes us back to the frightening days of planned economies in the 1970s. In other words, government at arm's length from economic activity. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is the government needs to be proactive, but proactive in the right way. Just going back to inflation, in cost-push inflation, many economists will agree that the last thing you do is burden people with extra interest. To make people go out and borrow money that they didn't want to borrow in order to live and then make that money more expensive, whilst you're making their mortgages more expensive. Right. And by the way, we've received a lot of information that banks and mortgage lenders are raising monthly mortgage payments right now by far more than the increase in the interest rate. I couldn't
agree with you more, which I think that you want to talk about what government should do. It seems to me that that should be made unlawful. The idea that they price gouge their own customers, you know, when bearing in mind the government bailed a number of these banks out, is an absolute grotesque.
Absolutely. 2 weeks ago, Morgan Stanley said that the direction of travel of a number of factors in the United States was such that there wouldn't be a recession, and everyone rejoiced. And only a few days ago, none less than Goldman Sachs announced that due to the interest rate increase by the Federal Reserve in the States, the likelihood of the U.S. now going into recession has doubled. Yeah. Now, in business, in the commercial world, people get sacked for results volatility like that.
Yeah, surely the lesson of the past is that bankers don't get sacked, they get bonuses. And certainly nobody's ever prosecuted. I mean, you and I would have a long discussion, no doubt, about what happened in 2008. You know, Dr. Roger, I have to say, it's a real privilege to listen to you. I never know the guests that are going to come on, but that you can make deliberately, and I think it's very important, macro and microeconomic issues understandable by everybody. And you do that deliberately is incredibly refreshing. So I've got 2 minutes left with you. I'm going to ask you to come back on another day. But in those 2 minutes, if you were chairman of the Fed, but more importantly, our chancellor, what would your prescription be? How can we save ourselves from getting into recession and above all else, improve or at least limit the damage of inflation?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, Rob, for your comments. But, I mean, let me be the government collectively rather than the chancellor. What I would do is, first of all, I would immediately take the interest rates back down. You can't do that to people. And, you know, Boris and Rishi might as well hand the next government to Starmer, who takes, you know, a shot every day since Boris has been, his ratio of good suggestions.
Yeah, they're not landing, though, but that's a whole other issue. But
it's about 10 billion to 1, yeah. So, but he's still going to hand everything to him if he irritates the people any further. It's getting to a terrible point. Interest rates, number one. Number two, petrol. On a 180-pound liter of petrol, try to find that, by the way, right now, but on 180 pounds, almost 53% of it goes in government fuel duty. Most people don't know that another 30% goes in VAT, and that VAT is not just on the fuel; right. It's on the tax.
Right. Yeah.
We pay triple hit tax on tax, and we pay that with pounds that we earned on which we've already paid tax. Take the VAT of 30% off fuel tomorrow morning for at least 6 months. Oh, that's the second thing that they should do. I think the third thing must be VAT on energy bills in the home. Again, we're just being gouged. The green energy cost should be paid by the windfall tax. Thank you, Chancellor Sunak, not by us.
Yeah. Dr. Gewolb, I have to say, you've Dr. Roger Gewolb, you've come up with 3 suggestions where a number of our listeners and viewers will be standing up and applauding and wondering why it is that experts that know what they're talking about never run for office. Perhaps it's the pay, who knows, but we're going to have you back another time. It's been, I have to say, clear to listen to you. It's Dr. Roger Gewolb, CEO of Fair Money, personal finance expert. I don't know if he's on social media, but I'd advise you to follow him. I certainly will be. This is Talk TV live from the Talk Radio studios.